This country's economy has been flirting with disaster, thanks in no small part to Donald Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs. But what if Canada was more independent with a stronger energy sector? Canada becoming a natural resource global powerhouse is a big talking point on the federal election trail. This country is the 5th largest producer of natural gas in the world, but as of now has 0 terminals to export liquid natural gas. That ability could be a game changer for Canada's economy and help us wean off our dependence on America. Politicians are making big promises, from faster project approvals to whether or not they'll keep production caps and the industrial carbon tax. What actually needs to happen for Canada to compete? We sat down for an exclusive interview with Francois Poirier. He's the CEO and president of TC Energy, one of North America's energy giants. Thank you so much for joining us today, Francois.
Pleasure.
You are in such a critical industry right now that the people are talking about a lot. People are thinking about our sovereignty and our security, whether it's energy or the military, in ways that, frankly, Canada hasn't been forced to think about before. And I thought it was really interesting that when I was doing the research for this interview, one of the things that you talk about is Canada's most significant form of geopolitical hard power is energy. I think people think military when they hear hard power. I'm really interested to know what you mean by that.
Well, what we've seen evolve here over the last several years is a realization that there's a linkage between economic might, energy might, technology might, and military might. And when you think about the role energy plays in an economic dominance, in military dominance, it plays a significant role. Look at the AI race that's happening right now. We're in a race with China to dominate that sector, and the big question right now is there enough energy to power data center growth quickly enough for the US to maintain that technological dominance? So energy is really part of the fabric of every one of those aspects.
And energy is a huge part of the Canadian economy. I think it's something that you think about a lot out west, which is where I grew up. Here in Toronto, maybe you think about it a little bit less because you're looking at Bay Street. But I think folks wonder, can we still be energy dominant? Can we be energy independent? Because what we kept hearing from the last government was there is no business case for it. Those days are gone. It's time to move on from the energy sector. Obviously, I'm assuming TC Energy has a different perspective, but why do you believe there is still the opportunity or ability for Canada to become energy sovereign and not rely on the US or other countries?
Well, look, 15 years ago, we were in the starting blocks on the LNG industry with the US, and 15 years later, we're just permitting our very first facility, and they're the largest exporter in the world. So we've relied on the US as our market for exports. 99% of natural gas that Canada sells abroad goes into the United States. And you have to ask yourself, is Canada truly economically sovereign if tariffs from a single country can impact our prosperity? So what we need to do is diversify our markets. And there are 2 aspects to that. The first is, can we get our energy to Tidewater to have access to global markets? And secondly, given the vastness of the country, should we be ensuring that we can supply all of our own domestic demand with domestic production? And that means more pipelines, much in the same way that the Trans-Canada Pipeline was originally conceived of over 70 years ago.
I was going to say, we have a history of a very slow approval process. It almost rivals our military procurement process for being very slow and easy to come off the rails. How quickly would this have to happen for Canada to be able to protect itself in terms of sovereignty and to be able to seriously compete against the United States on LNG?
Well, we have a time-bound opportunity. Let's look at Alaskan natural gas. Locating LNG production off the west coast of the continent is a big advantage to other parts of North America. And the US has not been able to permit projects in Oregon, Washington, or California, but Canada has. We're commissioning our first facility now. Mexico is doing the same thing. So there's a real opportunity for us here to win the Asian market. Alaskan natural gas is going to compete with us, but it is a good solid 5 years behind in terms of developing the pipeline infrastructure. It's a very complicated place to build pipelines. And so we have a time advantage if we decide to pursue it today. But if we look at the timelines that have been required in Canada to sanction infrastructure, it's been far too long, and we could lose this opportunity again if we accept the status quo.
Just to go back to Asia there for a moment, because one thing that I found interesting in reading some of what you've said and written in the past is that you believe we could be the primary supplier to Asia.
Yes.
I think that might surprise a lot of Canadians.
Yes. So right now, Australia is the largest supplier of LNG to Asia at 10.5 billion cubic feet per day. We have the supply to get to 12 to 15. We have the engineering know-how, and the demand is there. One of the things that's brought this opportunity back around for Canada to compete with is the free and democratic world no longer wants to rely on Russia for its energy, number one. Number two, demand for natural gas has accelerated considerably over the last couple of years for some of the reasons we talked about in terms of energy might being such an important driver to geopolitical influence. And so we're seeing demand for LNG from North America tripling from 13 billion cubic feet a day to almost 40 billion cubic feet a day by 2035. So the opportunity is there for us to take.
There's been a lot of policies that have been instated that it's no secret oil and gas companies have not been fans of, and a lot of them have come up on the election trail for both Liberals and Conservatives. Things like, for example, the West Coast tanker ban, Bill C-69 and possibly reversing it, whether or not there should be production caps on large emitters or carbon levies on them around the whole carbon tax conversation. When you look specifically at policies that would have to change that are regulated by the federal government within their control, whoever that might be, what are the things that you identify as critical?
Yeah. There are a few big ones. The first is obviously the tanker ban. I mean, if we're going to have 5 or 6 LNG facilities being supplied by 3 or 4 pipelines in British Columbia, we're going to need to allow for more of that tanker traffic to occur. The big one to me, though, is the emissions cap on the industry. The problem with having a national emissions target when global emissions is, by definition, a global problem, is that for a resource-rich and exporting nation like Canada, who only generates 1.5% of the world's emissions, a national cap prevents us from helping the other 98.5% of emitters reduce theirs, much more so than what increasing our own emissions to produce LNG to export to other markets. Asia's consumption of coal has tripled in the last 30 years. They consume 80% of the world's coal now. Just replacing 10% of that consumption of coal with natural gas would actually displace half of Canada's entire annual emissions across all industries. So the opportunity there, really, there's alignment between economic growth, economic sovereignty, and emissions reductions.
You know, there'll be people concerned about the environment who hear this and say, well, of course the big emissions, people want the cap off, want the levy off, but it sets a bad example. What would you say to them?
Again, I would say that national targets have failed in achieving the global goals that we need to accomplish. So if my emissions increase, and we do this, we sell natural gas to Mexico. They've been burning crude oil in their power generation. They're now able to burn natural gas with about 70% lower emissions from burning natural gas than diesel for power generation. Our emissions are going up a little bit, but it's more than offset by the dramatic reduction in emissions they're seeing. The mechanisms in the global community for recognizing collaboration between countries doesn't really exist, and that needs to change for us to be able to make that contribution.
Do you get the sense that you can get Canadians behind this? And this is something I run into as an Albertan who's lived in Ontario her whole adult life. It is sometimes two solitudes, and we're not just talking about, you know, English and French Canada. Yeah. How do you unite Canadians? Do you believe that what's happening with Donald Trump and the tariffs will be enough to do that?
Well, I would say that it's certainly awakened, what's happened with President Trump has awakened national pride in the country in a way that I haven't seen in a couple of decades, number one. Number two, it's forced us to ask some hard questions of ourselves around our economic sovereignty, and do we really have it? And then when you look at the different sectors of the economy, where does Canada have hard power? Where do we have clout on the global stage? It's in energy. So it is, in my view, by far the best opportunity for us to increase our clout on the global stage and also achieve more independence across the country.
What's our vulnerability if we don't act?
Vulnerability is the lost opportunity, and that we give up the opportunity for economic sovereignty and a continued dependence on the U.S. for our exports.
Francois, thank you so much for sitting down with us today in Toronto and sharing the view of TC Energy and the industry with our viewers.
My pleasure.